Hello, welcome to Musashi Japan's knife selection video. Before we get into the knives, there's a couple of things you gotta think about before you make your choice. First thing is steel type. In knives, we have carbon steels and stainless steels. Pros and cons for both, they're a little difficult. There's no such thing as a perfect steel for knives. Carbon steels are a little bit harder, so they'll stay sharp longer. They're more pure alloy, so it's easier to resharpen them, but they will rust. So when you use your knife, you have to dry it before you put the knife down. If you cut like a lemon or something with citrus acids, it'll rust the blade within like 15-20 minutes. So you really have to be mindful of cut something, dry the knife, then put it down. Stainless steels are a little bit softer. You'll have to sharpen them more frequently, but they're stain less. You can cook dinner, go eat dinner, come back in 2 hours and do all the dishes at the same time. You don't really have to worry too much. In carbon steels, there's a couple of subcategories, and the same with stainless. Stainless has like a VG or an AUS. In Japan, we have a silver 3, which has got a lot of carbon in it, so it's a very hard stainless steel. In carbons, there's like a white or a blue super. There's no perfect steel, right? It's all about a balancing act of what you need for you. Harder steels, yeah, they last longer, but sometimes they're more brittle, more likely to chip. Stainless steels are usually a little bit softer. You have to sharpen them more often, but the daily maintenance is much lower. Think about that first, and then we go on to handle types. In handles, we have two main options. You have the Western handles, and you have the Japanese handles. Western handle knives usually have the 3 steel rivets with the extra steel around the handle. So the weight balance is much farther back. You're meant to kind of hold the knife in a firm grip by the handle with a slight pinch or finger on top, more for slicing tasks. They're really good, really heavy. Whereas Japanese handles don't have all that extra steel. Our knives at Musashi do have a full tang, comes down about 75% of the handle, but the weight balance is much farther forward. With these knives, you kind of want to find that balance point on one finger and then pinch the blade. You put 3 fingers on the handle like this. This is the Japanese pinch grip. It gives you much more edge control for peeling tasks or for slicing. When you're chopping with one of these, it just feels right to hold it like this. You can hold a Japanese knife more farther down on the handle, but for me, there's 2 problems with this. The first is you lose that edge control. The second problem, when you're chopping, it feels like I have a fishing rod in my hand, and I'm always lifting the front of the knife. But you choke up on it, pinch the blade, it just feels much better. So yes, first we think steel types, then we think handle types, and then we get into the fun stuff. This is a Santoku. San means 3, toku is virtue. So 3 virtue knife, meat, fish, vegetables. It's the perfect home cook style knife. It's not too long, really nicely controlled. There's a bit of a curve to it so you can still do your rocking chops. It's the perfect knife if you can only have one knife in your home. So we're gonna cut an onion here. It's got a nice length, so it's not too long for the onion. You don't wanna be using a huge knife for this because you wanna get nice lots of chopping motions going on. When you're chopping, you get really thin little slices. Perfect separation between each piece. You can also use the tip of the knife if you wanted to do more of a diced. It's the perfect size to slice down and push in between each of the pieces. And notice that my wrist isn't at a really crazy bent angle because the knife's not too long. So you have good tip control on this knife. Nice little slice this way, then we can do a fine little brunoise. Also with the curve of the knife, you can follow through with that rocking motion, finish off any leftover little pieces. And we can do carrots as well. Just a simple little rock. There's almost no effort when you push down through the knife. Very easy. And then when you're using the rocking motion of the curve again, you just get nice rocks. Japanese knives, however, are more designed for that push or that pull cut. An example, this is a push cut, and even with the curve, it's still perfectly usable. Pull cut, same thing, but backwards, and then chops, just like that. So as the Santoku is a really good all-purpose knife, you can do vegetables, you can also do meat. It's a very good shape, just to quickly slice through a piece of chicken. I like to butterfly my breasts if I'm doing a cutlet or something, or some diced chicken, and I have some more evenly sliced pieces. Almost no effort from the knife. Et voila. Here we have a Guto. Similar to the Santoku, this is an all-purpose knife, but it's a little longer, which makes it better for cutting meat. This is more your chef knife style. Still has a really nice curve to the blade, so you can get lots of rocking action going. Really great for mincing garlic. but it's a little longer so you get those nice slices in. If you're trying to trim fat off a piece of beef or pork, or trying to cut some nice roast or your steak or something, you want to get nice thin slices, it's a really good knife for that. I really enjoy how these balance in the hand too. I feel like I can do a lot of damage with one of these knives. All right, cutting some onions. Similar to the Santoku again, you can get nice thin slices, good point control, fine dice work. These knives are also really great for top and tailing some garlic, getting some nice thin slices, and getting that rocking motion going. I feel like it can go a lot faster with a Guto. Just because of the length, it feels a little bit more controlled for me. Might just be because it's how I was trained. It's really nice. Just after a few seconds, you almost have a perfectly mashed garlic. Looking at a piece of meat here, and try and trim off some of this fat, maybe cut some of this off, see if I can't get this pork loin out of here. Gutos are really nice because of their length. Get nice slices and carve right through this fat cap. And then if you wanted to slice that into some thin pieces for slicing off, a really good knife. Now this is a Buka. Very similar to the Santoku, but it usually has a bit more of a straight edge, as well as this very iconic reverse tanto cut-off tip. Nowadays, this style of knife is only allowed to be used by like the head chef in a professional kitchen. Everybody else is supposed to use the rounded tip. Originally, Bunka actually translates to culture. A long time ago, Japan only had fish and vegetables in their diet. When they got introduced into the meat world, they needed a new knife. So they took that vegetable cleaver and just cut the tip of it off to make it better for slicing tasks. These really fine, thin slices. Yeah, not bad. Really nice to control. Do some nice thin push cuts. Bunkas are really good for slicing tasks as well. Using this fine tip, you get really good tip control. Get nice little slices just with the tip of the knife. As you can see, Bunka, and it's more straight edge, much better for slicing tasks than it is at chopping tasks. It is an all-purpose knife, so you can do both tasks with it. It's just a little more convenient for doing those nice slices. This is what we call a kiritsuke. Its proper name is kiritsuke Guto, because it's got that same nice long edge that the Guto does. The kiritsuke is usually a little bit straighter, and it has that reverse tanto tip. Really good for slicing meat, chopping vegetables. It's one of my favorite all-purpose knives. With the tip of this knife, you have really good tip control because that tanto tip is very sharp. Great length on these. You get those nice, long, clean slices. The length is probably the best for cutting meat. This is what we call Nakiri. It's a vegetable cleaver. It's a very thick spine and a nice straight edge, perfect for chopping vegetables. Even peeling sometimes are really good for. A little heavier front balance than some of the previous knives like the Santoku or the Guto, but it's really designed to help you get through any like tough vegetables, carrots, potatoes, cabbage, really good vegetable knives. However, they're not the best at meat just because of the shape. It's hard to get that nice kind of slice to go through meat with, but any vegetables, this is the knife you want to be using. Even peeling tasks with these knives are very simple. Doesn't take much effort at all to get through the potato. Get into a nice couple of big chunkies. Say you're boiling some mashed potatoes or something. Don't need to get too fancy with it. Just really quickly, all chunked up. One of the restaurants I used to work at, we used to have to go through, I think it was like 15 big bunches of green onions every day. This was the weapon of choice in that restaurant, let me tell you. Just a little square up, and then off to the races. Most of the knife will do the work for you in this. Very quickly goes right through all the green onions. I'm just spraying all over the counter here. Another great attribute of this knife is how long and how tall it is. Really helpful when you're trying to do a big piece of cabbage like this. Just give it a little press in the middle, flatten it out a little bit, and we can get nice little strands of cabbage very simply. Just like that. Ready for a salad or garnishes or under your tonkatsu. This we call an Usuba. It's almost exactly the same as the Nakiri. The big difference is this is actually a single bevel knife. So this side of the knife is sharpened and planed. The back side is almost completely flat. The big advantage is when you're doing a peeling task, you can get very thin little peels, especially when you're doing katsuramaki, or you're making that ribbon peel all the way around the daikon. The big disadvantage of one of these knives is if you're trying to cut straight down, it'll actually follow this angle and plane off to the side. So you have to correct that by putting a little bit of outward pressure when you cut down. And you can get straight cuts, it just takes a little bit more technique to get through. For example, this is what we call katsuramaki. So you take your knife, peel it under the skin of the daikon. And we just keep working our way. When we get to the end of the peel, we can either pull up and cut this off. We don't need the skin anymore. So when you take your big strips like this, cut it into some pieces, soak it in water for a little while, and you can cut it into nice little ribbons. And this is how you make the daikon tsuma for underneath your sushi piles. You have like your sashimi sitting on top, and this is your nice little garnish. Makes a nice little bed underneath your sushi pieces. You just peel off the skin of the cucumber nice and gentle, trying to keep that just under the skin but not come through, all the way till we start seeing seeds come out, and then you're just left with the seeds in the core. And then this is how you get the perfect little cucumber baton for inside your sushi rolls. Your California roll, your veggie roll. But just like the Nakiri, the Usuba is really, really good for just chopping through vegetables. Almost no effort at all. You just push through a whole bunch of carrots, get your rengiri, nice little diced pile of carrots. So these are petty knives. We have a couple of different types here. This first one, this is kind of your more traditional double bevel classic petty knife. Really good for peeling tasks, cutting some cheese, mincing some garlic. When your Guto or your Santoku is just too big for the task, this is the knife you want to use. It's got some good weight behind it. It's nice and strong. Knuckles aren't too hard. It's really good for fruit knives. Some light vegetable work, but not the most vegetable work. I mean, I'd be kind of worried to do like a carrot with one of these knives. When you're chopping, it might skip and catch a finger. But for doing light, soft fruits, maybe an onion, some cheese, it's a really great knife to use. The second petty here, this is actually a single bevel petty knife. It's much better for peeling tasks, getting those nice thin little slivers of things. And again, this is only a single bevel knife. So if you're trying to do those straight cuts, it'll pull to the side. It's a little tricky to use, but really fun once you learn that technique. Even better for peeling. Get really thin, tiny little garnishes. If you wanted to use this apple peel for like a cocktail or something, you get really accurate control over the slicing. It's also really, really good for doing little cucumbers and stuff. Sometimes your big knife is just too big to pull out. You don't want to wash it, it's too long for you. So these little knives are also really, really good. Light little vegetable works like that. This last petty knife, this is more of a garnishing petty knife. It's very tiny compared to the other ones. This one's really, really good for doing little garnishes in like a strawberry rose or like little mushroom caps for detailed garnish work. You get fine little control, get some nice little, almost see-through slivers of garlic off of there. Or if you're doing like a strawberry rose or some mushroom garnishings, you can really choke up and hold the knife itself. It's really light and little and controllable. And then you can do nice little presses into a mushroom. This next knife is called a honesuke. This is a traditional Japanese chicken knife. The fine tip is really, really good for getting around bones, deboning this way. And then when you have a joint in a chicken, you'll break the joint open and use the triangular shaped heel to really push through those joints. It could be used to break down bigger things like a beef shank or a pork belly or something like that where you're trying to get around bones, but it's more apt at doing chicken just because of the size. Let's get some chicken wings. So use the knife, hold it open, find your joint, and the tip of the knife can be used to get in between the bones. This is what we call a Hakata. Very similar to the Buka, except it has this iconic curve in the back of the spine. I think the idea for this is it actually be turned upside down to use to help scale your fishes. And with the tip of this knife, you can use it very similarly to other fish boning knives to get right under those fish bones along the belly. It's also strong enough to cut the head off the fish. Nice edge control, very good tip. Get under those belly bones. And this knife isn't explicitly a fish knife, but it does work very well as one. Can be used for other meats, larger fish, smaller fish. This is what we call a Deba. This is a single beveled fish knife used for breaking down whole fish. It's a very thick spine for crushing through the spine bone, cutting the head in half, and helping you fillet the knife. The single bevel of this knife is really good for getting really close to those bones and missing as little meat as possible. When you're using the knife, you want to just score the skin, and you can go back, get deeper into those bones. Very Japanese knife. Most Westerners will use that really thin, kind of flexible boning knife, but I much prefer one of these. It's got a really good blade weight and really gets the job done. Here, we have a yanagiba. This is your sushi slicing knife. First, you would use a Deba to break down a whole fish. Then you use your yanagiba to slice your sushi or sashimi. It's also a single bevel knife, so it's flat on this side and has the chamfer on this side. The idea is when you're cutting your sashimi pieces, it'll push the material away on the side of the bevel, but leaves a perfectly clean slice for your next piece. This knife is what we call a tako hiki. Tako is octopus, hiki is to cut. Similar to a yanagiba, this is a single beveled slicer knife. So the back side is flat, and the front side has got that chamfer on it. But unlike the yanagiba, this knife is much thinner this way. So octopus is normally a much tougher, chewier meat, so you can get away with using a thinner knife to get even thinner slices through the octopus. Don't have any octopus today, we're gonna cut some fish. Technique is almost the same. You want your one finger on the back of the knife, good grip, and then a nice straight pull through the fish. This knife is called the suji hiki. Suji is sinew, or the connective tissue between muscles, and then hiki is to cut, or knife. So suji hiki is your slicer knife, normally designed for cooked meat or big briskets, rack of ribs, big roast turkeys. This is your slicer knife. It's also very good at doing fish as well, because you have that nice long blade, it makes very clean cuts. The suji hiki, although it does do a really good job at fish, it's more designed for meat. Get those nice slices, peel that fat right off of the meat. If you're doing a nice stir fry or something, you want those nice thin slices, you can get those with this as well. This knife is what we call a bread knife, or a serrated blade. It's a slicer knife in essence, but it has these serrated teeth. Best used for when you have something nice and soft that you don't want to crush with a straight blade. These little saw teeth will help you start to make a cut without actually crushing what it is that you're cutting. So best used for a nice soft bread or like a croissant or a muffin, something that you really don't want to squish, but you get those nice slices out of by making that nice clean saw motion. You probably get nice really thin slices, nice big thick chunkies. The idea is that you're sawing through the bread without having to crush down through it. Another great use for serrated knives is tomatoes. Because like I was saying with the bread, you don't want to squish it, crush it. Same thing with tomatoes. Sometimes they can be filled with a lot of water, so you don't want to crush them with your knife. So a serrated knife is a great way to get clean slices without breaking or crushing the tomato. This knife is a Japanese-made Chinese cleaver. Great big blade for chopping things, for smashing through chicken bones. It's a very versatile knife, but it's very large. It takes a bit different skill to get used to, but a lot of chefs only use this knife. It's so heavy, but once you get used to it, it's really nice. With cabbage, it takes a bit of a different chopping technique, but you can still get really nice, fine shreds. I know a lot of European and Western chefs will have like a chef knife and a petty knife and a vegetable knife. And I know a lot of Chinese chefs that will only use this one knife. They get so good with it, they end up like spinning it in their fingers. You gotta look it up on YouTube, it's really cool. Totally be used to chop your chicken wings as well. Just gotta make sure you hit the joint, just like that. Now these knives are something very special to our company at Musashi. These handles are all made from recycled ocean plastic from one of the beaches on the west side of Tsushima. The east side of Tsushima is beautiful. It almost looks like a tropical island. It's so clean, it's so gorgeous. But the west coast, it almost looks like a landfill. It's exposed to all these ocean currents and they keep having all these waste plastics washing up. There's this volunteer group called Tsushima Kappa that will collect all the plastic on the beach. And they sort it by color, and then we take it and pack it into the handles for a lot of our knives. Part of the proceeds of these knives also goes back to that volunteer group to help continue cleaning up the beaches. I'd say if there was ever an ocean-wise knife, this is probably as close as we're gonna get. And they're really special for our company. So now, let's talk about some aftercare. There's a couple do's and don'ts with Japanese knives. Firstly, stainless steel knives. When you're done using them, wash them and dry them properly. Never leave the wooden handles soaking in the sink. The wood might inflate, especially with the Japanese handles. It'll inflate and the binding might come loose from the blade. With carbon steel knives, when you wash them, you need to dry them immediately. When you're done cutting something, before you put the knife down, dry it immediately. Clean is less important, but dry is crucial. I'll say it one more time. Dry is crucial with a carbon steel knife. In addition to that, Japanese knives are usually a little bit harder than some of the other steels you'll find elsewhere, so be careful of the tips. Don't stick them into things and try to pry it open. You'll probably chip the tip off of the knives. Using a honing steel before or after you use the knife is a really good way to extend the length of the life of the sharp edge of your knife. With any knife, never put it in the dishwasher. Dishwashers will destroy your knives. If it has a wood handle or a solid steel handle, bouncing around in the dishwasher is still going to destroy the edge of your knife. Frozen foods, big no-no. Don't be slamming into anything frozen or big bones. You're going to destroy your knife. You'll chip the blade or you'll crack it. It's a bad idea. Wooden cutting boards, your best friend. Because they're a little bit softer, they'll help extend the life of your blades and the edge of your knife. Carbon steel, one more thing, don't forget to oil them. And if you're using the knife every day, oiling them is less important. Just wash it, dry it immediately, that's perfect. But every time you sharpen your knife, you should oil it. Or if you're storing the knife for a little period of time, maybe coming to Japan to buy some more knives, oil it before you leave home, just to protect the knife from any moisture or humidity in the air from attacking the blade. That's pretty much it. Be nice to them, they'll last you a lifetime. Sharpening your knives. There's a lot to go through here. There's different styles of knives with single bevels and double bevels, different stones to use. There's so much information out there. I'm gonna try and narrow it down, give you the most specific, basic tips I can. First, let's talk about your stones. There's 3 types of sharpening stones out there. There's oil stones, then there's 2 types of water stones. Don't use an oil stone for any kitchen knife. The oil creates too much heat and you'll ruin the temper of the edge of your blade and it won't stay sharp for very long. Water stones are the best way to sharpen any knife, be it Japanese, Western, anything. With water stones, there's 2 types. There's soaking stones and there's splash stones. Soaking stones, you have to submerge in water for about 30 minutes until you stop seeing the little air bubbles coming out. Then the stone is nice and homogeneous and you can go ahead and sharpen your knife. The stones that we have are called splash and go stones. You literally just splash some water on the surface and away you go. Now, what kind of stone should you use? There's different grits. What do all these numbers mean? Basically, the lower the number is, the more aggregate per square centimeter. So a really low number is a very rough stone. It's gonna remove a lot of metal very quickly. The higher the number is, the more it's actually a polishing stone. And instead of changing the angle of your knife, you're more just polishing the surface of the cutting edge. To sharpen a knife, normally you want to start on a nice low number. This stone here is actually a dual purpose stone. The one side is 1000 grit, which is really good for reshaping your knife, but it's not too aggressive where you're moving too much metal quickly and you're gonna ruin the bevel. It's a good starting point for anybody. The 6000 is a really nice finishing stone. It's just enough where it's polishing the edge, but it's not too much where you're just shining the edge. You're not wasting any time with this stone. To start with basics, you want to start with a double bevel knife. The stone goes like this, the knife about 45 degrees on the stone. If you're too vertical on the stone, you're not going to get a good sharpen along the plane. You're going to roll your edge as you move the knife. If you're too horizontal on the stone, you're only going to be sharpening the knife in patches and it's going to wear unevenly. You won't have a straight cutting edge. So 45 degrees on the stone is the best place to start. Then you want to come up off of the stone 15 degrees for Japanese knives. There's some exceptions to this. If you're doing a lot of vegetable chopping, you want a bit more of a wide angle so you have more strength across the edge. If you're doing more fish slicing, you want a kind of a little bit thinner of an edge so you can have a nice clean slice. But for an all-purpose knife, 15 degrees is the perfect angle. For these stones, like I said, these are splash and go stones. So we just splash some water on the surface, give it a good rub, and now we're ready to sharpen our knife. 45, 15 degrees up. My right hand is going to make a triangle onto the knife. My finger goes on the spine, palm of my hand goes on the handle, my thumb goes right here on the edge of the blade. With this triangle locked in like this, I have very good control over the knife, so I can hold my angle. I'm not gonna wiggle too much. Something to be wary of, when you're doing your passes or your strokes, at the end, and when you start going a different direction, you're actually using a different muscle group. So when you push and then start to pull, people have a tendency to wiggle the knife. Be mindful of this. When you come to the end of a stroke, be gentle, pull the knife back. Now with our hand like this, our left hand is going to take 2 fingers and put it on the edge of the blade. You don't want to be on the stone, you don't want to be right on that cutting edge, you want to be just on that stone. And this is where our first check will come into play. If your knife is too low, you'll actually feel the edge of the knife with this hand. That means you're going to be rubbing the flat of the knife and you're not actually sharpening. If the edge is too high, it'll feel like your fingers go down the knife and then across the stone. That means your angle's too high. When you hit that perfect 15, it should be a nice smooth transition between your fingers, the knife, and the stone. So we push to the end of the stone and then back. We push and we're back. So that was 2 strokes. For every time we go like this, we use about maybe 20% pressure on the push and then 0% pressure on the pull. You don't want to be pushing down on this knife. You push too hard, yeah, you'll create that burr nicely, but you're going to damage the edge. You might wear this part faster than you wear the next part. So be gentle, take your time. So we start here. We do a nice pass, a nice stroke, maybe 5-6 times. Then we move our fingers down. Not too far, don't be jumping 3 times. Move your fingers so that your first finger closest to your thumb kind of takes the place of where your second finger was. You step your fingers down. Do nice strokes again. Maybe 5 or 6 passes, applying more pressure on the edge, trailing stroke, and less pressure on the pull stroke, right? Edge trailing, a little bit of pressure. Edge leading, no pressure. After 5 or 6 passes, we move our fingers down again. We will complete this all the way to the end of the knife. If you noticed, as we get to the edge of this knife, the tip, the knife curves a little bit. So every time we move our fingers, make sure that we're still at that 45 degrees on the stone. And keep going with these passes. Move your fingers down, adjust your angle, nice even strokes. All the way to the very tip of the knife. Just like that. Now, how do we know that we're getting somewhere? We take the pulp of our thumb and we run it across the edge this way. If you're doing a good job, you'll slowly start to feel a burr developing along the edge of the knife. If you feel the burr all the way along the knife, we can move on to the next step. If you don't feel the burr, maybe it's yes, 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 oh, missed a spot, yes, yes, yes. Don't hit just that one spot. Start again. Do a full pass of the knife. You don't have to do a lot of strokes. Maybe only do 2 or 3 strokes for every section, but don't do just one spot. If you do only one spot, you're gonna wear that part of the knife unevenly from the rest of the blade. So do that whole pass again. Then check for a burr. Oh, I missed a little bit in the tip. So another thing to be mindful of, check to make sure your stone is always wet. The wet stone should be wet, right? Just a couple more strokes, final pass. Pay special attention to that tip, because I missed it last time. And check for a burr. Nice. Perfect. Got a really good burr all the way down the edge. Now, we flip the knife over to do the other side of this knife. 2 techniques here. Some people like to switch hands. For me, I'm not so strong with my left hand. I don't have enough control. So what I'll do is, I'll turn my hips when I flip this knife over. Maybe even turn the stone a little bit, just to make sure I still hit that 45-degree angle, but it needs to feel controlled. My right hand, instead of making the triangle on the back, flip the knife over, now my fingers are like this. I still have that triangle, I still have a really good edge control. So when I lock in my angle, it's nice and stable. These fingers go on the edge of the blade like this. We do the same thing going the other direction. So on the edge trailing stroke, maybe 10-20% pressure. On the edge leading stroke, 0 pressure. You're just keeping your fingers on the blade to keep it stable from rocking. All right? Do 5 or 6 strokes, move our fingers down. 5 or 6 strokes, move our fingers down. Now, just by the sound, I can tell that my stone's too dry. So I'll add some more water. Make sure you're always at that 45 degrees. Feel the first side where we had a burr, now there's no burr. On the other side that it was now the upside, just starting to develop a burr on this side. maybe not enough on the heel. So reapply some water, do another full pass. Don't neglect any part of the knife just to save some time. Spend your time, take your time. The more time you spend, the better of an edge you're gonna have. All the way to the tip, look at that. No burr on this side. Nice, nice little burr all the way down that knife. So on the rough stone, we've created a very strong burr on one side, and then we pushed it back to the other side. If we can look at the edge, it should be nice and straight and even. You don't want any wiggles and wobbles as you go through the edge of the knife. This side looks pretty good to my eyes. You can see the burr formed, it's looking nice. The other side, there's no burr, nice and smooth all the way down. No chips, no chunks missing, pretty good. Well, we've taken our dull knife and we've pushed it back to a nice straight edge. We've created that burr, we pushed the burr to the other side. Now we can flip the stone over. Add some water, make sure it's nice and smooth, nice and wet. And we go back to the first side. At this point, the burr should be on the bottom of the knife. Create that triangle again with our hand, fingers on the edge. 45 degrees on the stone, 15 degrees off. Nice triangle, good strength, good stability, fingers on the blade. Here we go. Now with the polishing stone, you're using even less pressure than you did on the first side. We really don't need to change the shape of the knife at all, we're just polishing that cutting edge all the way down to the tip. The rough stone reshapes the edge. If you looked at the side of it, it'd be very jagged and rough. So the polishing stone kind of polishes that so it's nice and smooth. So if you're cutting some paper after the rough stone, you'd feel the jagations of the edge. New word. After the finishing stone, it should be a nice clean slice. Okay, so I just did this side. Don't have a burr yet, but that's okay. Just do a couple more passes here. Nice and gentle, not much pressure, keeping the stone nice and wet, focusing at the end of the stroke. We don't wobble the knife. We keep that 15-degree angle all the way to the end. Put some water on the stone again, flip the knife over. I turn my hip, maybe turn the stone a little bit, find that comfortable spot. Go again on this side. When you're doing your strokes, you want to make sure that you're using the full length of the stone as well. If you're only doing these little kind of half strokes down here, trying to work a specific spot, you're actually going to work the stone and warp it. And after a while, you won't be able to sharpen a knife on it. You'll actually have to plane the stone down again and fix your stone before you can fix any more knives. Well, we're almost there. There's maybe one more trick we can do to get this even finer of an edge. With a knife, you can use a piece of paper, you can use your leather belts, or buy a proper leather strop like a barber uses. But now what we're gonna do is just work the knife back and forth across the piece of paper like this. This is called stropping. If there's a little bit of a micro burr left along the edge or any kind of small little hills and valleys along the cutting edge, this is gonna help polish that last little bit out and remove that last little micro burr off the edge of the knife. Good and sharp. Another way to tell if your knife is really sharp is to cut a piece of paper. You should be able to get razor, feather the cut, it's really sharp. If you can curve the cut, it's very sharp. Next one we should talk about, single bevel knives. There's two different types. There's a fish knife, which you want a true single bevel edge on this knife. You don't want to have a secondary bevel on the one flat side, right? The other type is more for vegetable knives. These are single bevel, so really good for peeling tasks, but if you only have one edge on these, the actual edge itself can become very thin and brittle. So you're chopping through some carrots or something, you're gonna chip the blade. So with this kind of a knife, we actually put a secondary bevel on the single bevel side. The back is still nice and flat, but on the bevel side, there's actually a secondary edge. For these, it's not super difficult. It's very similar to the double bevel knife. From this line here is a shinogi, this is your edge. So we lay the knife flat between the shinogi and the cutting edge, 45 degrees on the stone. When you lay it flat on the shinogi line, then we bring it up, again, 15 degrees. This will create our secondary bevel. And for this, it's nice and straight, so I'm not gonna be turning the knife at all as I go from one end to the other. Water on the stone, nice and gentle. couple of strokes here, all the way to the end. If the knife was very dull, you would start on the lower grit stone, work your way back up. This knife was already pretty sharp as it comes. To fix the burr on a single bevel knife, the back of the knife is almost flat. The middle is actually concave just a little bit, but on the spine and the actual cutting edge, there are two flat spots. So we lay that flat on the stone. Then you want to pull the knife away from the edge towards you. Take it off and put it back to the top and pull the knife. Move down a little bit, pull the knife. We're only pulling the knife in one direction because we don't want to push the burr back to the angled side. We want to create that burr a little bit and then pull it straight. So you keep that nice flat back side so we can keep those nice little peels going. But if we were to push or lift up, we'd actually create that double bevel. We don't want that. This is a single bevel knife. So 45 on the stone, 15 degrees up. A couple of strokes all the way through to a pass. Lay it flat. Pull towards you. You're just pulling that burr back to straight. And then you have a very sharp knife again. Single bevel, same with a double bevel. You can strop the knife. This is a sushi knife. This is the yanagiba. So we're gonna sharpen the shinogi line to the cutting edge of this knife. Make sure there's nice lots of water on our stone. You don't want to create a secondary bevel for this. We want a very narrow cutting edge because you need clean slices for fish. Flat on the shinogi line. 45 degrees on the stone. Triangle with the right hand, left hand on the blade. Nice and gentle. Move our fingers down. All the way to the end. There is a situation where you do want to go back and forth, and that's if your knife edge is actually very dull. Like if you ran it across the stone this way a few times and you had like a square edge, you're gonna have to actually sharpen the back side of the knife as well as the bevel side. And that's just to thin the blade out until you come back to a nice bevel, okay? At that point, you would repeat the same process I'm doing now. Just the shinogi line and then pulling the flat back towards yourself. That's looking really good now. We got the nice cut, beautiful. So, double bevel knives, we create a burr on one side, we push it to the other, then we go little by little by little back to the very tip. Start with a rough stone, go to a finishing stone, then we strop. Single bevels, for vegetables, you want to create a secondary bevel closer to the tip to make it stronger for chopping through things, right? Again, 45 on the stone, 15 degrees up. For single bevel sushi knives, you want to lay it flat on that shinogi line and polish it out. And then just drag that flat side back. And that's pretty much it for sharpening. You know, with carbon steel knives, after you sharpen, you should of course oil the blade as fast as we can. You should have a nice sharp knife, and it lasts you a long time. Arigato.